In December of 1872, a ship was found drifting across the open Atlantic, with no living soul aboard. Her sails were partly set, her cargo sat untouched in the hold. There was food and fresh water below, and every one of the 10 people who had sailed on her had simply vanished, never to be seen again. The ship was the Mary Celeste, an American merchant brigantine. She had left New York Harbor on the 7th of November 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy. In her hold were more than 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, the kind used to fortify wine, not to drink. At the helm was Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, an experienced and famously sober master. This was no ordinary cargo run for him, because he had brought his family along, his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. Their young son stayed behind on land for school. With 7 crewmen, that made 10 people aboard, a captain, a family, and a handful of sailors, setting out across a winter ocean. Nearly a month later, on the 4th of December, another ship spotted her. The Dei Gratia was crossing the same waters, about 400 miles east of the Azores, when her crew noticed a vessel moving strangely, yawing in the wind as if no one was steering. Her captain, David Morehouse, knew the Mary Celeste. He had even dined with Briggs in New York shortly before they both sailed. He sent a boarding party across the heaving sea to investigate. What they found has puzzled people for more than a century. The ship was, by most accounts, in seaworthy condition. There was water sloshing between her decks and several feet of it in the hold, but not enough to sink her. The pumps worked, and she was floating fine. The cargo was almost entirely intact. There was about 6 months of food and plenty of drinking water. The crew's personal belongings, even valuables, were largely left behind. But the ship's single lifeboat, a small yawl, was gone. And so were all 10 people. Here's where I have to be honest with you, because this is where the legend takes over from the facts. You may have heard that the Mary Celeste was found with warm meals still on the table, tea still steaming, a half-eaten breakfast abandoned mid-bite. That image is almost certainly a myth. It comes largely from later sensational retellings, and from a short story written by a young Arthur Conan Doyle in 1884, years before he created Sherlock Holmes, which fictionalized the case and even got the ship's name wrong. The real boarding party described a wet, somewhat disordered ship, not a frozen dinner scene. So as we go, keep separating what was documented from what was invented. What was documented is strange enough. The last entry on the ship's log slate was dated the 25th of November, placing her near the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. That means she may have drifted, crewless, for around 9 or 10 days before she was found. The captain's navigation instruments, his sextant and chronometer, were missing, along with most of the ship's papers. That detail matters because it suggests the people didn't flee in blind panic. It looks like they left on purpose, taking the tools they would need to navigate, and climbed into that little boat, and then something went wrong. But why would an experienced captain abandon a sound ship in the middle of the ocean? Here, the records and the historians genuinely disagree. The most popular theory involves the cargo. When the barrels were finally unloaded in Genoa, 9 of them were found empty. Some of those barrels were made of red oak, which is more porous than the white oak of the others, and may have leaked. The idea is that alcohol vapor built up below decks, perhaps a frightening rumble or a sudden venting, made Briggs fear an explosion, and he ordered everyone into the yawl temporarily, keeping it tied to the ship by a rope while the fumes cleared. If that rope then snapped, the ship would have sailed on while the small boat, full of people, was left behind on the open sea. It is a plausible story, but we cannot be sure, and no soot or scorching was ever found. Other explanations have been offered. Some point to a waterspout, a sea tornado, which could have driven water into the ship and tricked the crew into thinking she was flooding faster than she truly was. Others suggested a seaquake, an undersea tremor that may have jolted the barrels and spooked everyone aboard. At the official inquiry in Gibraltar, one investigator even suspected murder, mutiny, or insurance fraud. But no blood, no signs of violence, and no real evidence of a crime were ever found. Every theory explains some of the facts and stumbles on others. What we know for certain is this: 10 people climbed or were forced off a perfectly good ship into one small boat on a cold grey sea, and none of them were ever found. No bodies, no wreckage of the yawl, no survivors washing ashore. The Mary Celeste herself sailed on for another 12 years before meeting a far less mysterious end. But the people who left her that November simply disappeared into the Atlantic, and the truth went with them. If you want more forgotten history that sounds made up but isn't, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.